Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to start matters rolling, even though it's only 1 minute past the hour appointed for doing so, because I'm aware we've got an extremely tight timetable. Welcome to the Patient Engagement Open Forum, or PEOF. PEOF is a series of virtual and in-person events where we will work together in a multi-stakeholder context towards stronger patient engagement. So here we are virtually today to talk about a very important part of patient engagement. Together with some superb speakers, we're going to talk ethics, with particular focus on ethics committees and patient engagement. My name is Peter Davison, and I'm an ethics committee member at the University in Freiburg, Germany, and a very recent UPATI fellow. I will be your moderator for this session. This is my first time as a moderator for a virtual session, so wish me luck. Luckily, I'm joined by a stellar cast in the world of ethics, and most importantly, all of you. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items to be explained. Please be present and engaged. Your microphones are turned off, they're in mute. Please use the chat button for providing questions, comments, and feedback. Be aware that the entire session is to be recorded. And above all, please, let's make the session interesting together. We also have, and this is another first, an AI live translation tool. I'm going to pause for 15 seconds so you just look at the graphic. You can now translate the session into over 50 languages. Just if you can, follow the 3 steps on the slide if you want translations. Today's agenda is shown here on this slide. We will chat to our speakers and hear their experience and perspectives. We also want to hear from you. For our co-creation activity, which is the second half of today, we will be using some software called GroupMap, and Amanda Lyons from UPATI will explain how to use and join this activity when we get there. With GroupMap, you get to share your opinions with everyone. We will also ask our speakers to comment on your ideas and to help kickstart engaging conversations. Let me introduce today's speakers. Emily Vereker, who is the head of the Irish National Office of Research Ethics Committees, joins us today. David Harry, who is a European AIDS treatment group member, has been involved with UPATI since its infancy and is a cantonal ethics committee in Zurich member. Joan Jordan lives with multiple sclerosis. She is a UPATI fellow and has national experience of being involved in ethics committees in Ireland. Jan Geisler is a cancer survivor and patient advocate, CEO of the European Patient Advocacy Institute and Patvocates, and a lay member of an ethics committee of the Bavarian Chamber of Physicians in Germany. I, Peter Davison, am also a recent UPATI graduate. I have a brain tumor. I'm the patient representative on a German national certification panel for neuro-oncology treatment, as well as a member of the ethics committee here at the University of Freiburg. We're going to start the session by speaking to Emily Vereker, the head of the Irish National Office of Research Ethics Committees. The National Office supports and drives the national system for ethics review of regulated research, now an integral component of the Irish infrastructure for health research. Emily will introduce us to Ireland's mixed model. Emily, thank you. I think now over to you. Thank you for joining the conversation today.
That's great. Thank you, Peter. And good afternoon, everyone. And I'm really delighted to be part of this webinar today. It's fantastic to have such a strong platform to be able to discuss this important role of patient, public and care representative members on ethics committees. So just a little bit of background about ourselves. The National Office for Research Ethics Committees It's a relatively new office that's an integral component of the current infrastructure for health research in Ireland. We were established in 2020 and we opened our National Ethics Committee doors fully in 2021. We're a unit within the Health Research Board, which is the lead funding agency for health research in Ireland, and it's a leader in involving public and patients in research through its funding initiatives such as the PPI Ignite network. We have a really highly experienced team in the office that manages and supports the National Research Ethics Committees to deliver a single national opinion for studies in regulated areas of research. And what I mean by that is clinical trials for medicinal products, medical devices, and in vitro diagnostics. So we look at, we assess ethics applications for studies that would be, say, for new treatments of cancer, for stents or inhalers in terms of devices, and the all too familiar COVID-19 test, which is an in vitro diagnostic. So we also support a relatively new committee, which has ethical oversight of the National Irish COVID-19 Biobank, and that's a new infrastructure in Ireland, which aims to support COVID-19 research. We're a component of the wider Research Ethics Committee system in Ireland. We have a mixed model system where we also have local or institutional ethics committees that have responsibility for ethical oversight of non-regulated studies. And just to also mention that the national committees that we support, they're just one component of the research study review journey in regulated research areas. And we work very closely with the Health Products Regulatory Authority that has responsibility for the scientific assessment of drugs, devices, and diagnostics. And next slide, please. So just to give a little context about the importance of the role of ethics committees, the following slide really just sets out the key ethical principles that are cornerstone to any ethics assessment. And the fundamental role of ethics committees is really to ensure that the study that a participant consents to enroll in is conducted to the very highest ethical standards. And just to speak to some of these standards, ethical principles now, the principle of beneficence and non-maleficence means really that the research should be worthwhile, it provides value, and that any risks and harms are very much outweighed by the benefits. Researchers should aim to maximize the benefit of the research and minimize and mitigate against any potential harm to participants by very robust kind of precautionary measures. And it's really important that participants are respected, they have autonomy and self-determination in terms of the studies that they want to participate in. And importantly, those with diminished capacity are also afforded those same very fundamental rights and freedoms. And it's important that research should be equitable and just between different members or groups in society. So an ethics committee will give careful consideration to those who are selected for studies, and that individuals are not unnecessarily excluded from studies. And some clear examples, I suppose, of some of the areas that an ethics committee would look out for, such as harms, would be maybe economic harms, where a participant may not be adequately compensated for out-of-pocket expenses that may be incurred during their participation in a study. So those are kind of elements that the committees would look out for. I want to just talk a little bit about the Declaration of Helsinki, because I think it's a really important international statement that was initially adopted in 1964, and this is really the cornerstone of all ethical principles that we would be drawing from. And recently they have gone about a public consultation process where they're updating and modernizing the Declaration of Helsinki. And I think it's nice to see that they're actually removing now the outdated and kind of devaluing term of subject and replacing this with participant. And the National Office has provided its feedback to the World Medical Association, who has oversight of this Declaration of Helsinki. And we've kind of requested that consideration is given to having a statement in there around appropriate compensation for any out-of-pocket expenses that would be accrued by participants as a result of their participation. And this is really to ensure there's equitable access to research as well. Next slide, please. So just back to Ireland, this slide simply shows the number of committees we support across and the number of ethics committee members we have. So there's over 100. And we have 4 committees that look after the ethics assessment of clinical trials for medicinal products. And we have 1 committee for medical devices and diagnostics, and then another one for the National COVID Irish 19 Biobank Committee. And you can see here we have a diversity of expertise that we require to form the, I suppose, to constitute our committee membership. And approximately 25% of our members would be considered lay members, and a proportion of those would be patient public care representative members. It's really important that the national ethics opinions that are informed, that we deliver, are informed by the diversity of appropriate skills and expertise and experiences, including interests and backgrounds that are really reflective of Irish society. So you'll see here an example of the kind of expertise and experiences we're looking for. When our members are sitting in those meetings and deliberating on the ethics applications, it's the PPI members, their opinions are given equal weight in the decision-making process. The same weight as those members with, say, more expertise in medical expertise or scientific expertise. And so PPI members are considered experts in their own right in this regard, through the lived experiences and knowledge that they would draw from to inform the ethics opinion, which is delivered on a consensus-based approach across the committee. Next slide, please. So in terms of seeking PPI membership for our national committees, I just wanted to give, I suppose, an example of how we go about this and how we bring PPI members onto our committees. And in the instance for the National Irish COVID Biobank Ethics Committee, it's a bit of a mouthful, we developed an expression of interest form, and we're very lucky to have Joan, who's a presenter today. She sits on that committee. But this form was developed and it was disseminated through the PPI network that our host organisation, the Health Research Board, has. And there's over 300 individuals that would be PPI contributors within that network. And it was really important to ensure there's transparency and equal opportunity to be able to join the committee. So there is a culture of PPI activity really starting to embed within Ireland, and this has stemmed from the work of the Health Research Board. And it's also informed the legislation that now frames how our committees should be constituted, and ensuring the inclusion of patients and public representation on our ethics committees. And I've just also highlighted here, we have another kind of called a sister committee called the Health Research Consent Declaration Committee. And this is another statutory committee that provides review of studies which may need a consent waiver as such, where participants aren't able to consent for themselves for whatever legitimate reason, and the research is in the public interest. And that committee also would have patient PPI representation on that committee. So we see there's a nice precedence there, and there's a common theme around the importance of PPI in the Irish health research ecosystem. And so the last slide, really, next slide, please, is just to summarize, I suppose, what we're talking about today, the importance of bringing that diversity of perspectives onto an ethics committee. We're including the patient public care voice that can bring, the knowledge that they have through their lived experiences to bear, often through their own health journeys or, etc. And this ultimately contributes to a robust ethical opinion, and that it's grounded in expertise and lived experiences, and really brings together those principles that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. We want to ensure there's inclusivity and equitable access to research, where participation can really benefit societies and the publics. And finally, I think this really, having this PPI representation on our committees instills patient and public trust in the research, and ideally will build on a kind of a strong culture of participation in research. And that's really very much interlinked with improvement of healthcare and treatment. So that's kind of an overview of the Irish perspective at the moment, and the importance we place on PPI activity and representation on our committees. Thank you.
Emily, thank you very much for speaking with us today. Next, we're delighted to have David Harry, who is a European AIDS Treatment Group member, co-chair of the Advisory Committee for EUPATI Foundation, and a Cantonal Ethics Committee member in the Canton of Zurich. David is here today to talk about the efforts Swiss Ethics, that's the Swiss Association of Research Ethics Committees, are making to strengthen PPI in the committee and the results of these efforts. David.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you for the changing the slides. So I joined the Zurich Ethics Committee almost 2 years ago, and after a few months of struggling what to do, I discussed with our president, and finally we approached our umbrella, Swiss Ethics, to do something to support patients and public members joining ethics committees in the future. A little bit first about the structure of ethics in Switzerland. We used to have committees in every canton. This was changed 9 years ago. Now we have 7 committees left. 2 are still cantonal, the one in Geneva and the one in Ticino for language reasons. And all other commissions cover a region including several cantons. There is one in Bern for also covering German-speaking Fribourg and German-speaking Valais. There is a big one in Basel covering several cantons in the region until central Switzerland. There is Eastern Switzerland covering 4 cantons, and there is the one in Vaud also covering French-speaking Valais and French-speaking Fribourg and Neuchâtel. The one in Zurich is the biggest of all, covering several cantons and working with 2 committees in parallel, actually. So that's the structure, and they are all under the umbrella of Swiss Ethics. Next slide, please. And here is the picture we found. We found that the patient role in the committees is quite diverse. In Bern, there is a patient for 2 years. He is doing patient-informed consent and protocol review. In Basel, the patient involvement is ensured by the committee's director. The input is not specified. In Eastern Switzerland, there is somebody for 3 years, also a patient. He is doing patient-informed consent and no protocols. In Geneva, there are people. One is a pastor. She is there for 15 years. She is only looking at informed consent information, no protocols. In Ticino, there are 2 people from a consumer organization. They are alternating. They do patient-informed consent and protocols. In Vaud, there are actually 3 people. The one we have been talking to is there for 5 years. Input is not specified. In Zurich, there is somebody since 20 years from a patient protection organization, and me who joined 2 years ago. Input is not specified. So we have quite a diverse way of including patients in Switzerland, and we thought we should meet, all of us, and discuss how to improve and perhaps align a little bit how patients board these committees. And here is what we came up with. Next slide, please. We propose a framework that is out for adoption next month. We hope Swiss Ethics will approve. The framework mentions relevance of patient and public involvement because we are seen as experts providing our perspective and our experience that are unique and contribute to the ethical deliberation in a similar way as, for instance, legal experts are doing this in every committee. There should be fairness. Our input should be seen at the same value, at the same level as everybody else's. There should be equity because our involvement makes sure that the specific needs and requirements of study participants are taken into account and balanced against the requirements of industry and academic sponsors who are performing research. There should be capacity building for patients and public people contributing to the ethics committee, so they are really fit to deliver what is expected from them. Next slide, please. And the focus, we discussed what the focus should be of the patient representation in the ethical review process. And we came up with 10 areas: benefit risk assessment, fairness of inclusion and exclusion criteria, study participant burden. These are probably the most important ones. Then patient-relevant clinical endpoints we have an eye on. Insurance suitability is a minor one, but we look at it. The legal experts are more fit to do that. Data protection measures, very important, inducement avoidance, and patient information recruitment. That's actually the biggest bone, in my opinion. That's where I lost all my hair on looking at these. The readability of the informed consent documentation and the participant information material, and finally, conflict of interest. Next slide, please. So we recommend that there should be a job profile for PPI members in ethics committees and a written agreement. And we recommend this to make sure that everybody understands, including the patient representatives themselves, what their role should be in the ethics committee, and a role description of the people participating in the committees. They should be under the same transparency rules as everybody else in the ethics committees. They should be representative. Now, how can you, when you look at all indications and you are only 2-3 people, you can't cover all indications. So we need people who think beyond their own nose, beyond their own condition. We need people with a broad understanding of public health to join these committees. There should be an introduction, there should be training when they join, and this introduction is really very important. I had one. I realized later it could have been a little bit better and more specific for the needs I have as a patient representative in the committee. Next slide, please. There should be compensation like for everybody else in the committee, and there should be an impact measurement done by the committee on what the patients contribute to the committee deliberations. Next slide, please. I would like to thank the president of the ethics committee in Zurich, David Nadal, who supported us a lot, and he really stood up for us that we could collaborate as a group covering all Switzerland. Annette Magna, who is the CEO of the commission in Zurich, who was coordinating the effort, and all my colleagues from the different ethics committees all over Switzerland who contributed to this work. Thank you.
David, thank you very much for a very interesting set of insights. We now move on to Joan Jordan, a UPATI fellow who lives with multiple sclerosis and who's a committee member of the National IRID COVID-19 Biobank, which you heard Emily talk about earlier. Joan will explain her national experience in ethical committees and about the UPATI training. Welcome, Joan.
Thanks, Peter. If you told me a year ago that I was going to be here, I wouldn't have believed you, because I couldn't get involved in ethics in Ireland for a very long time. I'll tell you a bit about myself. I'm a person who participated in a clinical trial. Now, the drug being tested actually did not get market authorization. So I don't consider that the trial was a failure, because I got the chances to do clinical visits, to experience PROs, to know what it's like to take part in a clinical trial. And I think that that input is invaluable. Also, my son got very sick when he was 2 years old. He's now transitioned from pediatric to adult services, and that's another experience that I have that I can use in my work in PPI in ethics. Another thing that I have is that I've lived in many different countries. I studied computer science and got the opportunity to live in America for 2 years, lived in France for a year. I lived in the Netherlands for 4 years. So I got the chance to experience the values of different societies. And I think that has really benefited me in my work in ethics. Next slide, please. So I'm a really big fan of getting educated about things. And if you want to get qualified in ethics, this is the way. It's the UPATI ethics qualification. You can put it on your CV if you are applying to take part in an ethics committee. So it's apart from that, it goes through history of ethics, concepts, potential roles, how ethics evaluations are conducted, and knowledge really is power, I think, when you are a patient. So it's been 10 years since I completed the UPATI course, and about 14 years since I did the clinical trial. And I'm embarrassed to say that when I did my UPATI training, only then did I discover what informed consent really meant, because there was just so much documentation in my clinical trial, and so I didn't really get what informed consent was. And the UPATI course really helped me to understand. So I think I did things a bit backwards, but it really helped me to understand things. So I very much encourage people to get educated. It's your health. Nobody has more skin in the game than you do. Next slide, please. So Emily has covered a lot of this already, and I was absolutely delighted to apply for NREC, to have the opportunity to do it, and also that it was fair, that there was a process, that you could see how the system worked. It was transparent, and I have really learned so much from the different stakeholders involved in NREC. It's something that I really didn't think that I was ever going to get the opportunity to do, but now that I have, I just want to share it with you. Next slide, please. So this is a piece of sculpture that I made, and it's called Moves and No Moves. And if you look on the left-hand side, the figure has got room to move. In fact, it can rotate 360 degrees. And then if you look on the right-hand side, the figure is boxed in, and that's the no moves part of things. And I think sometimes when you are a patient, you can feel like there are no possibilities, that if you did want to get involved in an ethics committee, how do you do that? How is it accessible to you? Things like getting paid might prevent you, travel, things like that, and training, encouragement. So really, what we want to do is to move towards the moves box, where if patients want to, they can take part and contribute and learn from all stakeholders. Next slide, please. This is a lovely hot chocolate that I had a few weeks ago in Bordeaux. And I just want to reiterate the fact that this cost €8, and the UPATI training in ethics to get qualified also costs €8. So I really think it's great value for money. It's great. It's a really good foundation to start with. So I would encourage anybody who wants to break into ethics to do the training, and also not just patients, any healthcare professional or academic. Next slide, please. This is Julio. Julio was one of my teachers when I was doing my EUPATI course. Julio sadly passed away last year, but I can remember having a conversation with him saying, yes, I do find ethics very interesting. I think I have a lot to add because I've taken part in a clinical trial, because I've lived in so many different countries and experienced so many different cultural societies, but I just couldn't see how to get involved. And Julio, he just told me to just keep trying, wait until there's a crack in a door, push the door. And that's the thing that I love about EUPATI, is that we don't have to come from the same disease area, that we all pool our resources together and work together. And for example, Dominique from my cohort sent me a book about values, about expressing your values. And it's just really, really cool the way that patients from other countries with different disease areas collaborate and work together. So thank you so much for having me here today. You're doing a brilliant job, Peter. Well done. And yeah, I'm just really happy to be here.
I'm just keeping us all on track, Joan. Thank you very much for your patient's perspective and indeed your crack in the door perspective. We're now also joined by Jan Geisler. Jan has been a cancer patient and a patient advocate for 23 years. Among his many roles, he acts as a lay member of an ethics committee, the Ethics Committee for Bavaria in Germany. He's managing director of the European Patient Advocacy Institute and CEO of his own company, Patvocates. He's here to explain his experience with lay involvement in ethics committees in Germany. Take it away, Jan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter, for introduction. Great session already. And I'm trying to avoid to repeat what others have said, because of course, there's a lot where ethics committees are working similarly. I just want to probably tell you how I got involved into ethics committees, which was actually through my work as a European advocate on the EU level, because I was involved in the revision of the Clinical Trials Directive, which is the European Union framework for the conduct of clinical studies across the European Union. And the former directive from 2001 didn't really work well. And so from 2005, there were discussions about revising the law. So we started to discuss what became the clinical trials regulation over many years, which touched all the different frameworks, because it was let's say the legislator tried to harmonize the diversity of and heterogeneity of rules across the European Union for clinical trials. And one of it was quite a difficult space, was about ethics, because ethics is of course a subject which is dealt with very differently on the member state level. And also the judgment of techie ethical issues, some of them are handled very differently from country to country. In any way, I got involved in that in the clinical trials regulation, and I was also in touch with all different kinds of researchers in the revision of that, because I wanted, as a patient advocate, I wanted to make sure that the new law is right. And you can see that actually we started in 2005. The new regulation was passed in 2014. And actually it came into effect in 2022. That actually shows you how long it takes to actually reform how clinical trials are run in Europe. But what did it mean to ethics? Why I'm saying this today? Because when the actually law was passed in 2014, you know that the timelines changed in which clinical trials are being reviewed. And also, and that's why I have the legal text here on the screen, it said in the preamble under point 18 that member states should ensure the involvement of lay persons, in particular patients or patient organizations. that looks like a preamble text, but in the end, it changed the thinking of the ethics committees in Germany, because they said, okay, if we need to involve lay people then, and we didn't do that by then, let's then test how it works under the new legislation later on when we're obliged to do that. So then that's when the head of the work group of the German ethics committees, Professor Hasford, actually approached me and said, Jan, would you want to join our ethics committee of the Bavarian Chamber of Physicians in Munich? Which I did. And in the end, that's where I served from 2018 until today, reviewing clinical trial protocols outside of my indication space, because we're reviewing every clinical trial that's being submitted under the EU legislation or local legislation in that ethics committee. And you can see in the legal text, I've highlighted some sections where looking into the different parts, part 1 and part 2 of clinical trial applications. And every member state has a different law, how the ethics committee is being organized. So my perspective here, of course, is the German one. So like I said, I got involved. I'm one of 4 lay members in our ethics committee. Usually we have a balanced representation of a lawyer, of a statistician, of a patient advocate, of different clinicians in different, let's say, therapeutic areas or medical disciplines and so on. And we review the different clinical trial protocols. And on the next slide, you can actually see the tool that we're using internally, which is called Ethic Pool. I don't want to introduce you into the tool, but what you can see that I, as a lay member, I do not only see the stuff that patient advocates should be reviewing, like informed consent or patient-facing material, but we have access to all the documentation of the whole clinical trial application, which is usually probably about 1,000 pages. So of course, and we probably review between 4 and 8 clinical trials on every meeting. That's a lot of stuff to go through. But in the end, you can see in the pool, I see everything: the synopsis, the protocol, all patient-facing material, all questionnaires, the pro instruments, recruitment material, the patient information, or informed consent document, and so on. But I'm usually looking at some of them, which is the synopsis, which is the protocol, which is the patient the informed consent documents, while I sometimes refer to the other documents, which I've highlighted here in yellow. So what we found out, of course, that's been, let's say, my introduction into that was relatively easy because I've been quite a research-oriented advocate for many years. So I did a lot of science, even though my background is not science. So I knew at least how clinical trials work. But we saw that other ethics committee members, lay members, do not have that kind of experience. So they didn't know how to approach that. They didn't really have the training on research ethics and the history of ethics and the role of a lay person in that committee. So with Professor Hasford, I discussed over some years can we actually organize a training for lay people? So on the next slide, you can actually see what came out of that. So the working group of medical ethics committees in Germany, which is the more or less umbrella of the more than 50 ethics committees, and our organization, the European Patient Advocacy Institute, EUPADI Germany and Advocates, we developed a 4-module training for lay people in ethics committees in Germany to actually make sure they understand the responsibility of ethics committee members, the history of medical ethics, the role of lay members, different types of clinical studies, the regulatory framework, what conflicts of interest are, and practical examples of how to assess a study protocol and how to go through the different documentation. So that's what we launched actually into 2023 as a collaboration project. And then on the next slide, you can I would love to talk more about this, but that's just the overview. We as Advocates actually developed also module 3, which is more or less the way how we as lay people deal with it in our ethics committee. Start with informed consent, looking at consistency, terminology, understandability, language, presentation, like a flow charts or graphs or language or whatever. And then we go into the protocol and see, is there anything surprising in the protocol which we didn't really inform patients about? Or tacky issues about eligibility criteria and so on. And then we reconsider and go back to the informed consent document and look into, is something missing which we learned from the protocol, which patients should be knowing? And that's the usual procedure that we do. And we put our comments in writing, and during the committee meeting, we actually then provide our written comments and talk to them vocally. And sometimes we have quite interesting and inspiring and sometimes very difficult discussion, for example, about eligibility criteria, or why only men or women are being recruited to the studies, why there's age limits, or why or data protection issues and app use and whatever. So quite interesting discussions. But you can actually see that's how the EU legislation changed in Germany, how we actually deal with ethics committees. But what was also very interesting for us, because we had lay members from different ethics committees across Germany in our training, and when they saw what we are doing in our ethics committees, they said, "Are you crazy? I can't deal with so much English documentation. I just look at the informed consent document, which is in German." So we saw that the diversity and heterogeneity of how we as lay members actually contribute to the ethics committees are very different. And that also relates to what David has presented earlier on, is that we need capacity building. We need to think about what's the profile, what is expected of lay members in the ethics committee, how do they assess such a huge amount of documentation, what's the workload for these people, what are issues around compensation for all the work they put into that, and what's their task? So are they expected to really rip the protocol in parts in disease areas, which is usually not my own, because I review everything from any kind of disease. So that's just a bit of an impression on how we deal with it. And I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you so much. And back to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Jan. As an introduction to the overall landscape in Germany, Jan's talk, I hope, will have been of interest to many participants. I'm now going to talk about my experience covering the last 8 months as an ethics committee member at the University of Freiburg. Germany has ethics committees for each university and for each Bundesland. That means there are about 50 or so covering the whole of Germany. The ethics committees meet very frequently. In our university, they meet every 2 weeks throughout the year, and the meetings are large, perhaps 15 members in each meeting. As a result of this decentralization and frequency, ethics committee activity is potentially quite inconsistent. Jan used the word heterogeneity, and I think David used it as well. It's not only inconsistent, it can be opaque. The German legislation takes the view that the caliber of the chairperson and the institutional setting, usually within a university administrative structure, offsets this opacity. The mechanism for selecting lay members in Germany is arbitrary. Jan was called up because he happened to know somebody, and I was tapped on the shoulder because I happened to know somebody at the University of Freiburg. I learned from Joan, just in preparing this webinar, that there had been a meritocratic selection process for her role in Ireland. That was quite novel to me. Barriers to good decision-making. On such a tight timetable, the need to review complex documentation with scientific rigor is a considerable challenge. The ethics committee is not financially well resourced, so membership is necessarily, and in my view, medievally restricted to those with an independent income. The majority of my colleagues on our ethics committee are retired professors of medicine. In principle, I sit as an equal at the table with all these professors. In practice, that equality is rarely put to the test. My contribution was expected to be, and Jan made reference to this, that I would review the informed consent forms and review the expectations on participants, lay participants in the research, to see whether they were zumutbar, whether these are reasonable expectations of a human being. In practice, I've extended that remit to look at the study design and implementation issues that Jan also outlined. I'm going to move on, I think. Yeah. Can we have the next slide, please, Amanda? I'm going to talk just briefly about the bottom right corner of this slide about inclusion. I talked about the medieval nature of a committee session or a committee structure that relies on independent income. The university, of course, is as concerned as universities are all around the Western world to make sure that we're inclusive as far as men and women go, but we are by no means inclusive in terms of inclusion of ethnic minorities, of old people, young people, those with disabilities. Emily talked about that in Ireland, and I think I'm sorry to say that the German non-system is really quite old-fashioned in terms of its expectations, its assumptions and expectations about how well an ethics committee will perform on behalf of those people who are not de facto represented. Next slide, please. I want to finish off by looking at some areas that I perceive as critical to the work of ethics committees over the coming decade or so. I believe levels of participation and retention for study participants will improve over the coming few years because of the representation of the lay population on the ethics committee. We will get more people to come in and stay in studies that are being undertaken. What I mean under transparency is really verbal transparency. German prose is famous not only within Germany, but I think Europe-wide for its ability to generate non-transparent text. And you can imagine that medical documentation is a leading participant in that. I sent back just this week a research proposal from within the university on the grounds that the lay comprehensible summary, the study, was not in fact lay comprehensible. I'm going to refuse to discuss that proposal at next week's meeting, just because it was written in Greek rather than German. Risks and benefits, I'm moving on down. It is common knowledge that patients perceive risks rather differently from the way that academics and legal authorities see them. If you've been given, as I have, a diagnosis of a disease that's likely to kill you, you perceive risk in a different way. And although lip service is paid to that reality within the ethics committee, I'm not sure it's a lived reality. And I think we will continue to have to work quite hard to make sure that patient perception of risks as offsetting benefits gets due consideration. Top right, statistics trump need. I'm sorry to say that brain tumor patients, and I imagine patients of all kinds of disease areas, see their needs very differently from the way that statisticians see them. Social equity I've already talked about. What I have not talked about, however, is caregivers and associated family members who tend to get ignored in the entire process. We focus on the patient. We don't focus particularly on their spouse, their parent, or other person who might have to look after them. And finally, at the bottom right, patient-reported outcomes. We all pay lip service to this one, but it's an awful long way from here to there in terms of getting to patient-reported outcomes as a central area that might constitute the objective of a piece of clinical research in Germany. I don't want to finish on a negative note, although there are some negative notes in this slide. The more of us there are out there doing this, being lay representatives on ethics committees, the faster the moves will be in the directions that we all want to see. So I really want to conclude my talk now by inviting you all to come and join in to help these transformations move quickly and comprehensively in the directions that we all need. Thank you very much. Amanda, I think that means my spell as chairperson is over to you.
Yes, thank you, Peter. Thank you for the moderation and your input there. So my name is Amanda Lyons. I am from UPATI, and I'll be taking you through the group map activity. We're going to do this for the remainder of the session. So if you have not used this platform before, don't worry. It is easy to navigate and to use, and I'm here every step of the way. So we would invite you to use your computer rather than a mobile phone for a better user experience. So we'd ask you to open up another tab and type in groupmap.com. On the next slide, you will see the link to the group map activity. If the instructions do not appear at the top of your screen once you enter the group map, you can click on the eye on the top left-hand corner. So the next slide will show you the code. So browse to join.groupmap.com, and the code here, and it will be pasted in the chat, is 5A2D22379. And there you will be asked to enter your email address. And don't worry, I'm going to give you some time to join. The reason why we want to open up this activity, we wanted this to be interactive. We want to hear from you, your thoughts, your suggestions, your ideas. And this is a great platform to do it. We will be dedicating some time to answering 4 questions today. If we, we could probably talk about these questions for a lot longer than the time we will give. So we will open this and leave it open till Friday, the 8th of March, because we really do value your opinion. So I'm going to just stop sharing my screen for a second, and then I'm going to open up the group map so we can all see what's going on there. Now, some people might put in their suggestions into the chat box, and that's fine. But we would try and encourage you to join the group map, and you can see everyone's inputs there.
Amanda, I've just put 2 suggestions into my group map already, so that when people get
great.
there, they can already say whether they think those are good, useful ideas.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Peter. Okay, I'm going to reshare my screen now again, and hopefully you will be able to see the group map activity. Sorry. No. 1 second. Oh yes, I can see people inputting their ideas already. So let me just find it here. Okay, I see 64 people have joined, so just let me catch up now.
I'd be very, very keen to see some academics and researchers contributing, not just patients. If we've got academics and researchers, please add.
One second. For some reason, I'm having... Oh. Okay, I don't think you can still see my screen. The beauty of a live technological issue. Please bear with me. I can see there's 69 people joined, so you're flying through it already yourself. But let me just try and share my screen. And we see plenty of chat there too. Okay. Okay, and let me see. No, we're still on the group Mac link.
Amanda, would you like me to share the screen?
Yeah, could you? Because for some reason it's not letting me share. I have no idea why. So Daniela, yeah, if you could share, because it's not working for me and I don't know why. Okay. Anyway, Daniela has shared the screen very kindly there. Thank you. So this is the first question, and question number 1 is, what are the benefits of involving patients in ethics? So it's divided into 4 boxes. If you are a patient or a caregiver, we would invite you to put your input into the purple box. If you are an academic or researcher, we'd invite you to put your input into the green box. If you are from industry, the pharmaceutical, into the yellow box. And if you are from the regulatory or the HTA or another stakeholder, please put your answers into the kind of gray box there. And what that means is we can see which stakeholder you're representing. I see lots of people liking some of the comments that are already there. So if you see a comment that you like, you would go to the thumbs up icon and click it there. And maybe I would invite the speakers to comment on some of these suggestions. And they are ordered in popularity. So those with the most likes, you can see the first one there, reduce bias, has 6 likes. So I would invite some of the speakers maybe to comment on some of those more popular answers, or indeed an answer or an input that you think stands out.
I would just like to point out, if I may, Amanda, that
Yeah.
Because the most popular ones get to the top of the list, the bottom of the list is often invisible. You need to use the scroll bar to go down the list, especially to see the newest bits of input.
Okay. So
see what I mean?
So you can scroll down. You yourself, when you're commenting, you can scroll down as well and have a look at those. We don't want to ignore those comments that don't have a like, for example, beside it. All of your input is very valuable. But yeah, if we could invite some of the speakers maybe to comment on some of those ideas that maybe stand out.
Yeah, one thing that I find interesting is the comment in the stakeholder patients section, which is highest voted, which surprises me a bit, is about reducing bias. I mean, on one hand, everyone in the ethics committee has a professional background, so this is not a bias as such. But I don't think as lay people on an ethics committee are reviewing almost all applications outside of their personal disease space. So I review hardly any cancer trials, for example, because most applications are in other therapeutic areas. I don't feel I'm more biased than any clinician or lawyer or others actually in terms of bias when I'm doing the review. So I'd be interested probably in the background of that, to what extent there's a perception of more bias by the lay people on the committee than by other people on the committee.
Thanks, Jan.
I think Jan a bit. I mean, it's more giving other perspectives than reducing bias. I think that's what the context that it's meant in. So that it's giving other perspectives.
Does anyone have an additional comment about that? Or I see some comments actually beside some of the answers. Yeah,
I think
so
that would be very interesting. I mean, you can click on the text and then add a comment to one of the points. So
yeah.
if you have additional thoughts about the points, as not everybody can speak out probably in this webinar, you can also add your comments. That's highly interesting. We'll read that, of course, after the webinar.
So here you can see for the do more research on how effective PPI is in studies. This is a hiding to nowhere. There are so many soft inputs that lay people make as part of a teaching. We don't measure other research team members as part of a team. We don't measure other research team members. Okay.
Daniela has pointed out that there are people raising their hands. Amanda, do you want to call them to give some spoken input?
Yes, I think, I mean, we have time. So who, I can't see here, who has raised their hand?
Emma.
Okay, Emma, do you want to maybe say something?
Was it really just to come back on the reducing bias and a comment and from Joan talking about increasing the number of voices that are heard and the diversity of voices? I think that's true, the more voices that you hear, but a common theme has been to increase diversity on those panels and looking across the full breadth. And we're still looking quite still in quite a high level professional domain, even if they're not healthcare professionals that are represented or professorial academics that are represented on committees. There's still a socioeconomic lack of diversity, I think, across some of these panels. That means that you don't get full representation across different communities and how they feel, however that's represented. And that's possibly key to ensuring that we meet the needs of a broader range of people who might be participating in research.
It is really quite difficult, Emma. Speaking as a lay member of a committee, I have thousands of pages, as Jan talked about, thousands of pages of fairly dense professional language to review in preparing for a meeting. And so while I share the aim of broadening participation, I have to say that the task that I'm engaged on is not a task that many people would volunteer for.
Peter, can I just jump in there and just remind people about
Sure.
the fact that I participated in a clinical trial for 2 years and I did not know what informed consent was until I did my UPASI training. And I would consider myself a relatively intelligent person, but there was just so much jargon attached to it that the crux of the informed consent bit, the penny just didn't drop. And that is a big problem, I think, in that we want to be representational, of course we do, but then how can we make the material understandable?
We've got 2 more hands raised. I see Anthony and I see Emily. Anthony,
Emily,
will you go first?
Yeah.
Sorry, did you call on me, Peter?
Yeah, Emily.
You were second, actually, by implication.
Sorry,
Anthony?
no.
Hi there. Hi. Yeah, 2 things. One, I've been talking for a while about the difference between a lay patient and a non-lay patient, because my experience in healthcare research has been that there's plenty of non-lay patients, and that's why I brought that up there. So that was an interesting discussion in the chat about the difference between lay patients and non-lay patients, where it might be a retired healthcare professional. The second one is that I talk about bringing patient perspectives to meetings rather than bringing in representation. It's very, very hard for anyone to be like the representative for the entire population. You just can't do it. But you can bring a perspective. And then what I do say now is that I've been talking about the difference between what I call academic PPI, where you expect everyone to understand everything and work with how the professionals are working themselves, and community PPI, where you could literally walk into a supermarket in the toilet roll aisle and scoop up a whole group of people and bring them into your meeting and not train them, but support them to understand what's going on and support them to have a voice. And the way to do this in an ethics committee is that every ethics application must have a lay summary of that ethics application so that you aren't faced with thousands of pages of documents. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Because if you want diversity of community and diversity of population, you're just not going to get that unless you follow the community model of PPI.
Yeah, thank you. Let's move on. Emily, followed by Stephen Book. Emily.
Thanks. It was just a couple of comments on it. Sorry, there's a lot of reading on the questions with such huge interest, but just I suppose from the office's perspective here in Ireland, in terms of the lay and the expert distinction, we do have national legislation which actually sets out a definition around it. And within I suppose the lay definition, it's anyone who's a non-expert. But in terms of ensuring there is appropriate representation on a committee that's representative of all different, all aspects of society, maybe there's a possibility of bringing in experts onto a committee on a case-by-case basis if you felt that there was a lack of or a gap in representation for particular studies, you know. Similarly, if you would bring an expert in if you were, I suppose you had a very specific type of study that you wanted to get an ethics opinion on, say it was stem cell therapy, you might get an expert in that area. So similarly, you might want to approach a PPI, an advocacy group that might be able to bring in an individual to actually assist with the assessment for a particular study, because I think it's very difficult to get that broad representation consistently across all the committees.
The suggestion of an advocacy group is one that I make as a routine part of my contribution to our meetings. In one case in 5, something of that order, there is an advocacy group that could reasonably be included in the study design or in the reporting on it. Yeah.
And also, just the last thing I was going to say around training and I suppose the complexity of the documentation, I think it is very, very complex. The way we have it in Ireland is that we would have a lead reviewer and 2 secondary reviewers. And so you've got a kind of, you know, a buddy system there in terms of how the overall application is reviewed collectively. And we do provide training on the kind of the fundamentals of ethics for our committee, all of our committee members, whether they're PPI or experts.
Emily, you are doubtless a model. We've got 1 more minute on this question. We're going to move on to the next one. Stephen, quickly.
Hi, sorry, camera not working. Basically, the reduced bias was in regards to that if it's a healthcare question, having the person who's having healthcare delivered to them is extremely important. And we know that previously a lot of the ethics committees didn't have that input. And so the bias was more towards many of the stakeholders having a different type of skin in the game in regards to what they were trying to deliver to get their trial over the line, let's say. And so it was more, what is the benefit of that? And so that's really where I came from in regards to addressing that question.
Okay, thanks very much, Amanda. I think we're on to the next question, aren't we?
We're going to move on. Thank you so much. This is great. As I said, this will be open for the next 10 days. We're going to move on to the next question. What can be done to strengthen lay involvement in ethics? So here we've divided into kind of 4 steps: stop doing, do less of, do more of, and start doing. So again, kind of your initial thoughts to put in here, and we're going to give you 5 minutes for this one. So we have so much to talk about, and I know, but we will have this open. But please input your thoughts there. And again, I would invite the speakers to comment on what they see. So we have people, okay, stop training, thinking in barriers, okay. Do more of structured training at local level, okay, excellent. Train more advocates and community health workers to participate. Do more, share best practices. Okay, we have start sharing experiences and data, as was done today. Nice, okay. Harmonize and standardize onboarding training. Support, not teaching. Okay, some really good points here. We have some likes as well. If you like a comment, please press on the thumbs up button. Do more of education of patient, making materials understandable. Okay. And we have stop education of patients making. Okay, we've got the same comment in two of those, but do more of advertising the call to join. Okay, that's interesting. Peter, were you going to say something there?
No, I was looking
No.
for a way to click a thumbs up on one
Ah,
of the
okay.
comments. That's all. I'm struggling to participate.
There is a lot of chance here. Steve Burke, you have your hand up. Is that from before or no? That's down. Okay. Does anyone have maybe a comment here? You can put your hand up and we can. If you want to maybe speak up, you can at this stage. Okay, I think everyone's busy putting in their input. Stop believing patients can participate for free. Okay. Anthony raised your hand. Do you want to talk, Anthony, again? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. So I didn't write the stop believing patients can participate for free, but I truly believe in that, because at the moment, certainly in England, the vast majority of lay patients involved, or lay people or PPI members, are white, middle class, retired, educated people. They are often comfortably off, don't need the money.
Sounds just like me, Anthony.
And I've no problem with those people doing that. That's absolutely fine. But it is a case of what they're doing by not demanding payment for their time is treating other patients as 0 hours contractors. And many people who live on benefits cannot afford to get into doing something like this, because there's no consideration to sick pay, there's no consideration to holiday pay, there's no consideration to pension contributions. So Involve in the UK pay £25 an hour, which, all right, it may be a reasonable hourly rate if you were doing 30 hours a week of that, but we're not. And there's never enough time put into consideration for preparation time, reading time, travel time, just the whole headspace. Yeah. So the financial side is really important. And
it
so
is.
I think
I would just invite consideration, though. If we've got 50 such committees across Germany, and each one's got maybe 30 members meeting on approximately 25 occasions per year, that rapidly builds up as a sum for the national consultation budget.
But what's the alternative, Peter? Sorry, I'm just going to butt in there. What's the alternative? And I'm very strongly with Anthony on this one, because I am in a position myself that I no longer work, struggling financially. Actually, for me, taking part in the Irish Ethics Committee, I actually work out worse financially, because I moved from a payment where I don't work to being on this research ethics committee, even though it's only a few hours.
Yeah,
I'm in exactly the same position.
Okay, and Anthony, I take that decision to get less money because it means so much to me to be on the ethics committee, and if I get offered opportunities and they're not paid, I say no.
Yeah,
I'm in exactly the same position.
And I say no for the reason that you're in that position too. And I want to stand with all of you and say, if we keep accepting this and say, oh, you're going to do a presentation for an hour and we're going to give you 100 quid, but actually it takes 4 hours to prepare it. You have to travel to the place. You're tired for a week afterwards, which I'm going to be in bed all day tomorrow because I'm tired now after this discussion. That's not considered.
Guys, I think we need to move on. It's an extremely important topic, and we will find common approaches, and possibly a variety of common approaches to dealing with it. Dominique, you've got your hand up and your mic off.
I still had everything off. I don't know where to put it, but what I see is that often there's only one patient representative or lay person in the committee meeting, and I think that needs to stop. We need to be at least two, because we usually bring different things to the table, and it's good if there's more than one patient at the table.
The buddy system, Dominique.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
even just not within, like, I think that there should be a kind of a PPI group. Like, there's 15 of us in Ireland, so we should have a group, separate WhatsApp, where we can consider things and say, hey, this book is good, and, you know, educate ourselves.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're going to move on, and we can maybe put some of these suggestions in the final one. We do have a next question. The third question will come up here. Again, it's similar to the first in that there are stakeholder sort of sections where you can put your answers in. So again, if you're a patient or a caregiver, please put your answer into the purple. If you're an academic or researcher, please put your answer into the green, and following suit, pharmaceutical industry in the yellow, and then regulatory, HTA or other into the grey. I know I'm speeding you up about this, and we are really happy that you're being so engaged and active. But we can also continue this afterwards when we have this open, and we'll explore what you're saying a little bit more. And again, if you want to talk, please put your hand up. So we have some answers coming up here. So again, access, lack of training. Okay, so the challenges here are lack of compensation. Okay, that's a seems to be a recurring issue. Lode, am I pronouncing that correct? You have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm very confused by this question. The question itself is from a patient perspective, yet we have boxes for the other stakeholders as well. I think the first thing we have to do is to let stop academics and industry say what the patient perspective is, and so we needed only the purple.
Yeah, I guess that was because we wanted to hear the other people on the call as well, other stakeholders that are here, and what they think maybe be the patient's perspective. So just to kind of give that opportunity for everyone. Again, I would invite any of the speakers to come in here and comment on any of those answers.
Amanda, can you just please repeat the question for that slide?
Yes. What are the challenges from a patient's perspective of being involved in ethics? So what do you think are the challenges from a patient's perspective?
Can I just butt in on that subject? If you click on the bar at the top next to brainstorm, it'll open up and you can see the question.
Are people not able to see the question?
I don't know, because it automatically, I think the window closes down to just the 4 boxes. But if you click on the 3 lines, it opens up a side
and you can go down to the third question.
And you can see the question.
You're right, Stephen. I couldn't see the question because of that gray box. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen.
Yep. No problems.
So maybe some of the stakeholder groups have similar input here, have similar ideas. Are we seeing any alignment there?
I wonder if I can, if it's relevant at least to this question. It was a point I think that Jan made earlier, that the ethics committee gets to see a research proposal when the academic or academics involved in preparing that proposal have often spent 1.5 years developing it. In other words, quite late in the thought process. There has to be a role, as well as for the ethics committee, a role for sort of patient advocacy organizations somehow earlier in the research proposal development process. Jan, have I explained your point of view adequately there.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, I mean, I've wrote that earlier on in the chat. Earlier, when the clinical trials directive was there, we had time to negotiate with the sponsors, so we could go back with ethical issues and get the trial protocol revised. On the new clinical trial regulation, the timelines are so short, and actually, if we're just concerned member state, for example, we can only comment or reject, but in the end, we have no means to actually change the protocol, so we can just reject. So ethical issues, I think, need to actually be discussed before submission to the ethics committee, not during that, because it's often too late to make substantial changes, which might just lead to rejection.
Yeah, that's certainly my experience sitting in an ethics committee. We've got hands raised at the moment from Lode and from Dominique. Lode? Oh,
no, I think Dominique. Yeah, Dominique.
Dominique.
Yeah. Well, I sort of see what happens after the ethics committee, because there's no way in the Netherlands to get into one. But what I was thinking is, by example, what the FDA does and what we do when I review a research proposal, is there is a requirement that they show how they have involved patients in the development of the proposal. And that might be a good requirement to ask of the company, what have you, where have patient experts been involved and how have they influenced it? And the FDA now requires it even.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that would be a sort of standardized question that would be really, really good.
I think so. I'm going to move on quickly. We've got Emma, and then we will be on the fourth question of 4. Emma.
In a similar vein and supporting what Dominique said, I think that's something that is routinely done in the UK, that people are required, and Jim posted in the chat that you're asked those questions about how have patients been involved in the development of the research proposal that is being put forward. But it's not compelled, it's not something that has to be there, and why are we not making that something that is really mandatory for any research that involves patients? They should be involved in the research, and while timelines are tight, the onus should be on companies, researchers, whoever, to ensure that time is built in, that practices are put in place to ensure that that happens ahead of the submission to an ethics committee. I think that is within the will of people to do. If they're compelled to do it, it won't happen if they're not compelled to do it.
I fear that's correct. Let's move on to the fourth question. Thank you, Emma.
So the next question is the last question, and this is probably one that you'll need to maybe answer, when you have a bit more time, but it's about what are the next steps. So do you have any suggestions or ideas on how we can take this forward? Any actionable items that can come from our discussion today? Again, short time to put this on you, but maybe your initial thoughts would be really welcome here. I see there's also plenty of chat in the chat box, which is great. Okay, in any case, start as quickly as possible after initial basic training. Okay, so people are putting in their input here. And if anyone wants to raise their hand and say what the next steps can be, you're also welcome to do that if you don't want to type in something. Okay, develop a European training for potential lay ethics. Okay, some really good ideas coming out now. Public communication campaigns are key, and managing expectations. Make things more standard in Europe. Making PPI mandatory for REC submissions. Okay, does any of the speakers want to maybe comment on any of these inputs? Oh yes,
we pretty much agree with each other.
Okay, Emily, you've raised your hand. Yep.
Just a comment, I think public awareness, sorry, I put that comment in about public campaigns, but I think public awareness, everyone's aware of research, and COVID-19 brought out a lot of that. And I think that if there was more awareness around the what ethics committees actually do and the importance of public contributions, and you know, so we did a public campaign when we were setting up our National Office for Committees, and we had an expression of interest campaign looking for all sorts of expertise within the committee, including lay and patient public representation. So that might be something that should be maybe, I don't know if there's inconsistency around that across committees within Europe, but that's just one thing that I do think is important.
I think it's
Thank
really...
you very much for that, Emily. Let's move on to David. I'm very aware that we've got 3 more minutes of this webinar. We will take David and then Stephen, and then I have 3 minutes, I'm afraid, myself, of final remarks. David, quickly.
People are asking for training. There is actually a very good one at UPATI, an introduction into the ethics review process. What I would recommend that the European national platforms would do is develop a national training for the actual practical involvement in the national ethics committees, considering the national customs and regulations. So this would be a great feature to have. That's something we will work on in Switzerland.
Thank you very much. Stephen.
2 points. The European education, yes, but in other areas we've been talking about training, for example, in adherence to treatment. We also have to train the professionals to understand what the patient condition is and how to interact with patients. That's one point. And the point that I originally wanted to mention was the public campaign. I think that's very, very important that people understand what benefit risk is, how they can contribute, and to try and break down this mistrust of clinical trials and pharmaceutical companies, which are seen in a bad light, in particularly here in France. People just don't have any trust, so they don't get involved.
Thank you very much. That's a rather depressing note for us to finish on, but thank you, Stephen.
Sorry.
In the interests of our finishing on time, I'm going to make a few concluding remarks. I hope very much that you've enjoyed the session. It's quite clear to me that we've got enough material for the session to be twice as long as it actually is. It's never too early or too late to get involved. We need more lay involvement at all stages of the medical and treatment development process. And patients' voices, lay people's voices really can make a difference. Change is happening in various countries. And yet today, if we needed any further evidence, has shown that there's still a long road ahead. There are barriers and challenges. If we take action together, we can create more systematic changes. Please note the group map questions that Amanda introduced are still open until Friday next week. So they've got just over a further week to go. So still, if you have great thoughts that you want to share with the rest of us, feel free to do so in the next week or so. On to slide 42, which is about upcoming sessions. Yep, that's it. The next PEOF sessions that we've got, 7th of March, 19th of March, and 4th of April. I won't go through the titles, you can read them for yourself. The survey will automatically open in your browser right after this call, and post-session resources will be available within a couple of days. We've still got these next sessions coming up. Check them out too. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks also to our sponsors. And let's work together to spread the word of the Patient Engagement Open Forum. Please follow us on our social media platforms and use #PEOF. Thank you very much. Thank you all, and have a wonderful afternoon and evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.